Hello and welcome or welcome back to the Learning Research Network, or the LRN. My name is Sean Smith, and I say welcome back because many of you may have been watching this affiliated with a series that we've created for the Fire Foundation as we begin the 2024 fall academic year, or 2024-2025 overall academic year. Now, maybe some of you are watching this in the summer or the fall, or maybe even into the spring. But one of the reasons that Michael and I created this series is to really reinforce how we can better serve individuals with disabilities in our Catholic schools. And the topic for this session is actually a group of individuals, intellectual disabilities, that increasingly may be a bit of the poster children for the population of students who are serving for disabilities in our Catholic schools. And what I mean by that is many individuals, when they think of inclusion and they think of Catholic schools, they increasingly think of students with Down syndrome. I happen to be a parent of a child with Down syndrome. I have a 23-year-old son with Down syndrome. There's Nolan. And of course, our Holy Father has been pictured with a number of individuals, but we have that favorite picture of that child with Down syndrome that decided to come up and sit next to the Holy Father and just hang out. But those individuals, or these individuals with Down syndrome that fall into the category of intellectual disabilities, are increasingly kind of the poster child for this idea of inclusion, or answering that call of all are welcome. And my hope in this brief introduction to intellectual disabilities is to reinforce what these individuals can do, and they have a number of strengths, but also realizing due to the disability they do have some challenges. And therefore, as we plan and design, and we think about the interventions that should be successful, we should take into consideration what we know about the individual, and therefore what works, and also some interventions that might work for a typically developing child, but needs to be further modified or designed differently for the individual with intellectual disability. So let's start off with a definition, right? So an individual with a definition or designed or defined as an intellectual disability, as this visual shares, is going to have two primary areas of limitations, intellect as well as adaptive behaviors. Now, as this second screen shares, is the fact that adaptive behaviors can fall under a variety of different areas. So yes, social skills, yes, conceptual skills, and a variety of others. Some people will think of health care, or some will think of hygiene, and a variety of other things come into play. Now, let's think about the IQ for just a moment. And of course, some of us may think, well, wait, no, Sean, we're not 70 or below. I find myself in that 130 above. Well, that's great. Congratulations. But the individuals we're serving, and of course 68% of us are between that, 85 and 115. But anyways, individuals with intellectual disabilities are that 2 standard deviations below, and generally they hover around that 70 IQ. But equally important are those adaptive skill limitations. And so combined, an individual with an intellectual disability will have challenges with a limitation in their intellect, but equally in terms of those adaptive behaviors. And for some individuals, including my son, I'd have to say the intelligence, yes, a limitation, but it's the adaptive skills at times that offer challenges in terms of organization, memory, attention, things of that nature. Because, for example, if he listens to something, he hears something, a presentation and things of that nature, he can connect quite nicely to an understanding of that. But then memory, organization, attention, and all that gets in the way. But anyways, so let's focus in on that. And I'd urge you to think about that intellect as well as the adaptive, as I go and try to break this down further with a series of slides here that want to kind of reinforce how we can further think about, well, how does this idea of an intellectual disability in terms of intellect as well as adaptive behaviors come into play in my own overall classroom? Well, here's a few ideas. Number one would be the fact that with this delayed cognitive development, we have these individuals that their reasonability and basically thinking will be a bit delayed, right? So we'll see that with the individuals that we're working with. And that lower IQ we'll see there is the fact that they will have difficulty with the problem solving, the reasoning, and yes, overall learning. Now, for me, one of the primary areas that really comes into play is this difficulty with abstract thinking. And here it's that difficulty with grasping kind of the metaphors, idioms, and things of that nature, but also understanding and then applying these abstract concepts. So we're going to need to think about the language we use for them to be able to interpret it. Sometimes that language needs to be very literal or maybe visual supports. We need to maybe break down the problems into steps so they're not overwhelming, and a list of things goes on. These individuals will also have a delayed language development, and you may be thinking of my son here. or an individual with Down syndrome and say, oh, sure, they have language difficulties, but oftentimes that's due to the large roof of their mouth, small roof of the mouth, and the large tongue. Combined, there's a lot going on in that mouth. And so sometimes you'll see delays in that language. But individuals with an intellectual disability add to that in terms of the intelligence. It's the language and literacy model. And that is, as they're trying to difficulty developing language, that's going to have difficulty also in terms of their overall language ability, but also their reading, the vocabulary, and a host of things goes on there. As I mentioned, they already will have difficulty with problem solving, and problem solving everything from making connections to routines, understanding problems, and a list of things goes on. Reduced attention span I mentioned as well, and we have a number of individuals, right, with problem solving, memory, poor attention span, but here we have the same type of challenges associated with individuals with intellectual disabilities. Now, I made reference to memory earlier, and think of the memory and the fact that not only being able to get things into the short term, but also the difficulty from the short term to the long term. And that does impact their ability to recall information, process information, and I'm going to get to this a little bit later, but generalize information. And yes, social skills will be a bit of a challenge, but for these individuals, it's not so much in terms of what we often see with individuals with autism in terms of the social comprehension. It may be the fact that difficulty interpreting that facial expression, difficulty interpreting the conceptualization of things that are going on. Again, the abstract thinking, that's going to be difficult for a number of individuals due to that disability. So overall, that slower pace of learning is going to be critical for individuals with intellectual disabilities. And ability to sequence tasks, because that is going to be a limitation. So how do we better sequence elements? That's going to be an essential element for individuals with intellectual disabilities. But one of the key things for me, and we've been kind of going over this, is this inability to generalize, or the struggle with generalizing. And the generalization, of course, would be the fact that, yes, I may have learned it here, but the ability to apply over to the next step, which is, of course, an essential element that we expect. And that also, to me, translates over to the difficulty with adaptation, or I'm having difficulty with that language myself, right? But basically that unexpected change. We may see that come in terms of behaviors and things of that nature. So I could go on and list a number of different elements that the intelligence as well as the adaptive skill limitations will offer for an individual with intellectual disability. My intent here is not to show you how difficult they are to learn, but my intent is to show, well, listen, as we peel back intellect, as we peel back adaptive behaviors, these are elements that then have consequences. My hope in suggesting and sharing the ones I did, you'll take a look at learning disabilities, you'll take a look at attention challenges, you'll take a look at some of your learners that don't have any of those disabilities and say, I have students that have difficulty with poor judgment. I have students that have difficulty with social skills. I have students that have difficulty with attention. I have students that have difficulty with generalization. I have students that have difficulty with, and the list goes on. Yes, intellectual disabilities will have the same challenges as well. Now, that's not to say we use the same interventions, but there's things that will benefit all individuals. Let me mention a few, and I'll give you a link to some of the other resources for further consideration. We know that visual representation and visuals will offer support for individuals with disabilities. So video. Video has a great power, as we know, to engage lots of individuals, including students with intellectual disabilities. But we can break this down further with video modeling. I have some resources linked along with this video for consideration. But in addition to video modeling and video in general, visual supports. So some of the abstract ideas, some of that difficulty vocabulary, things of that nature. Visual supports can guide me, everything from visual schedules to structure the day, to visual supports to break down the overall idea of what I'm trying to sequence ideas to help me with that language and learning. Prompting is another critical skill that can break things down in terms of I'm having difficulty here, but I'm going to prompt you. I'm going to prompt you as we look to transition. I'm going to prompt you as we look to complete a task. I'm going to prompt you in terms of some of this learning that needs to go on and give you some guidance there. I've given you some additional resources to have you thinking more about intellectual disabilities, but I hope during this brief time you've gotten a sense of, yes, there's intelligence, and yes, there's adaptive skills. Hopefully we've broken down a little bit further, and overall conceptualizing what it is to have an intellectual disability to better be able to prepare to then what we can do to address, support, and overall educate individuals that are increasingly in our classrooms and our Catholic schools. Thanks again. This is the LRN, Learning Research Network, trying to assist our Catholic educators addressing the needs of all our learners. Thank you.